Hello, I'm Ads, and today I'll be showing you how I painted each of the main Tyranid Hive Fleets. Well, before they made some more up for 10th anyway. I'll also show you how to use the same approach to extracting a colour scheme from inspiration. So like my alternate Necron Dynasty video, I'm using an old set of minis for demonstration purposes. These Termagants were put together probably about 15 years ago, in a time before I knew about mold line removal, sanding or sub-assemblies, so don't mind the janky parts on these minis, they're just something to paint on. I'll be breaking the schemes down into different areas, which helps me when painting a scheme. For these Termagants I will be looking at the skin, the internal flesh, the carapace, the hooves and claws, the weapons, and the eyes and teeth. This won't be all-encompassing to every model in the Tyranid line. I won't cover how to do wings, for example, but you either pull from other areas of the scheme for that, or pick something else that fits what you've got going on. Okay, so let's get started with Hive Fleet Kraken. I started the Gantt out with a Wraithbone spray primer, as this will do most of the work on the skin very quickly. I washed all the skin areas with a good dousing of Seraphim Sepia, then used Wraithbone from a pot to relayer. I also glazed this around the rounder areas to bring back the mid-tone a bit. I then did a highlight with Pallid Witch Flesh, covering a smaller area than with the Wraithbone. I also repeated the glazing step in the same way, just again on a smaller area. You can call the highlights done here for the Gants, but for the larger creatures and characters, you might want to do a last spot highlight with pure white for some extra punch. For a last step on the skin, I brought back Seraphim Sepia and drew the dotted pattern you see on modern Kraken schemes onto the top of the arms and the legs, and around the back of the head. This is where the older formula washes are better than the current stuff, as it might take a couple tries with the new Seraphim Sepia. A contrast paint like Snakebite Leather might get you the same effect. I next blocked out all of the carapace sections with black. Really take your time around the edges, as it'll be a real pain to clean up off that bone colour. I then did a thin glaze of corn red towards the back edge of each plate of the carapace, along the claws and on the hooves. This is completely optional, I personally just like the look of it and it helps to fuzz the eye into thinking the whole thing is dark red. Then I edge highlighted and painted the striations with Evil Sun Scarlet, then again with Wild Rider red. The striations are something I often see people struggle with, and there's not a lot of getting around it, you need something of a steady hand to get a uniform pattern. The best advice I can give really is to root yourself down as best as you can, elbows bracing your desk, your painting hand bracing the other hand, and angle the model so you're painting towards yourself top to bottom. Water your paint down a bit more than usual to help it flow, and just take your time. If you're not happy, bring back either black or corn red to touch up the lines. I got to this point and forgot about the internal flesh already. I'm going to paint all of the internal flesh blue here, but depictions of Kraken often only depict the tongue in this colour, so it's your call on how much you want to paint blue. Either way, I start with a base coat of Thousand Suns blue, then wash back with Drakenhof Nightshade. A little relayer with Thousand Suns blue to the raised parts, and a quick highlight of Ahriman blue is all these parts need, though you might consider a point highlight of Temple Guard blue for bigger bugs. The weaponry you can also do the same colour of the skin if you'd like. As far as I remember, that was how it was done up until the 10th edition preview recently, where they painted the flesh borer a charcoal grey colour. If you want to do that, base the weapon in Corvus Black, paint on some edge highlights with Skaven Blight Dinge and Storm Vermin Fur, and you're good. No need to put a wash on. Then I painted the carapace sections on the gun the same way as I did the body. The rest of the details I'm going to do uniformly across all the schemes here, so I'll leave the teeth and the eyes until later. For now we'll call it done and we'll move on to Behemoth. I started out with a black primer for Behemoth, as I don't need to worry about the lighter colours too much with this scheme. Then base coated the skin with Mephiston red. Give it a wash back with Agrax Earthshade, before relayering with watered down Mephiston red and keeping some of that Earthshade showing in the recesses. Then highlight up with Evil Sun Scarlet, and for your more important critters you can go a step up to Wild Rider Red too. For the carapace, I'll first clean up the black areas and then throw a quick coat all over just in case I need to touch up. Then I glaze towards the back of each plate with Stegodon's Scale Green. Then draw in the striations with Sotek Green and highlight with Temple Guard Blue. Trying not to neglect the inner flesh this time, I wanted to mention that Behemoth seems to leave the inner flesh the same colour as the skin. Therefore you can simply highlight with the same colours and call it a day if you like. I went with a fleshy tone here, using Bugman's Glow, Reichland Flesh Shade, Cadian Flesh Tone and Kislev Flesh. However, if you're not a fan, by all means skip that part. Lastly, before moving on to the next one, I painted the guns in the same way as the Kraken Gant, basing all over with Corvus Black, highlighting with Skaven Blight Dinge and Storm Vermin Fur. These are slightly warmer grey colours than Ashen Grey and Dawnstone, and I barely use them so I thought I'd give them a try here. I also did the hooves and claws with the same greys whilst I had them on the palette. At this point I'll move on to Hydra, as there's just the teeth and eyes left. I'll do a pass over all of the minis at the end, as they use mostly the same colours. For the classic Hydra scheme, I started with the black primer to help with all those dark colours that we'll be using. The skin then got an all-over coat with Kantor Blue before washing back with Nuln Oil. I then highlighted again with Kantor Blue, and then with Calgar Blue. Recipes I looked up for called for a Leotark Blue, but I don't have it, so Calgar Blue it is. The inner flesh and the weapons are the same colour, so base coat both with Demonet Hide, being careful to minimise your overspill on the blue. I washed this back with Druchii Violet before layering with thinned Demonet Hide and highlighting with Warp Fiend Grey. You could then go up to Slanesh Grey on your characters and bigger bugs if you want to. The carapace is nice and easy. Firstly I clean up the black before glazing on Ashen Grey toward the back of the plates. The striations are then drawn on with Dawnstone and highlighted with Administratum Grey. Claws and hooves are the same colour combo, so repeat the same steps there. I also think at this point that I wanted to add a little more colour variation. So for the internal flesh of the gun and the pipes leading off it, I'm going to paint them pink instead. I based those areas with Screamer Pink, then washed them back with Caribou Crimson, then they got a highlight with Screamer Pink again, and a last brighter highlight with Kislev Flesh. And with that I'll move on to Gorgon, we'll come back to the teeth and eyes later. For Gorgon I started with a coat of Wraithbone Primer, to try and make the bone carapace a little easier later on. This turned out to be a mistake, as the skin then needs a base coat of Deathguard Green. Do not follow my example. I'm not sure if my pot is bad or if Deathguard Green is just an awful, awful colour, but this was really painful to get opaque and clean. Use Deathworld Forest instead, trust me. The skin is then washed back with Athonian Camo shade, relayed with Elysian Green, and highlighted with Oggran Camo. Characters can then get a point highlight of Flayed One Flesh if you'd like. For the inner flesh I liked how the fleshy pink looked on the Hydra Gant, so I'll repeat that with Screamer Pink, washing back with Caribou Crimson, highlighting again with Screamer Pink, and then again with Kislev Flesh. the carapace, I first tidied up the Wraithbone with a couple coats. I then carefully washed towards the back of the plates with Seraphim Sepia, thinning the wash down for better control. I then drew on the striations with Wraithbone and highlighted with pure white. Gorgon weapons, claws and hooves are all charcoal black, so we'll repeat our previous black steps from Kraken and Behemoth. Base coat with Corvus black, highlight with Skaven Blight Dinge, and then with Stormvermin fur. Moving on for now, let's get Kronos next. Kronos is primarily black in colour, so we can get through the skin pretty quickly. I started with a black spray primer, over which if you want you can apply a quick layer of your go-to black to help with cleanup later. You don't need to wash this because, well, it's black and you can't really wash black, so I went straight to highlighting with Ashen Grey and Dawnstone. It goes without saying that I'm doing layering here, but you can vastly speed up the process with dry brushing if you're powering through an army. I also added a very thin black paint and contrast mix over all the skin to help unify my highlights, but that is completely optional. For the inner flesh, I repeated the same steps from Hydra and Gorgon, going for the pink flesh look. To repeat, I based all of the areas with Screamer Pink, washed back with Caribou Crimson, highlighted with Screamer Pink, and then with Kislev flesh. For the red carapace, I started by blocking in with Mephiston Red and washed it back with Agrax Earthshade, letting it collect along the adjoining parts. Then I drew on the striations with Evil Sun Scarlet and Wild Rider Red, with the option then of doing a point highlight with Fire Dragon Bright for characters and monsters. The weapon is again black, but to try and differentiate it from the skin, I go for a different black colour this time. I block the weapons in with a pure black, highlight them with Dark Reaper, and then with Thunderhawk Blue. I use these same colours on the claws and hooves too. That'll do for Kronos, we'll come back for other details at the end. Next is Jormungandr. Jormungandr starts out with a black primer like Kronos did, so we again don't need to wash this one back at all, though you can give it a quick layer of black if you'd like to help with cleanup. Rather than use the same colours as last time, I highlighted with Skaven Blight Dinge and Stormvermin fur this time, unifying everything with the same thinned black paint as last time. It's a similar effect to Kronos, but it's just a slightly warmer tone, which is your call if you prefer it or not. The inner flesh is also the same pinky colour we've done so far with Hydra, Kronos and Gorgon. Block in with Screamer Pink, wash back with Caribou Crimson, highlight with Screamer Pink again, and then with Kislev flesh. For the carapace, I blocked in with a couple layers of Avalanche Sunset first, before washing back once or twice with Seraphim Sepia, feathering towards the front edge to keep the yellow brighter there. I went with a paler choice for the highlights, using Screaming Skull and Pallid Witch Flesh for the striations, with the option then of using white for the top highlight on characters and monsters. The hooves and claws are red on this scheme, and we've already got a black primer on them, so I started with a glaze of Corn Red on these, and a quick highlight of Evil Sun Scarlet and Wild Rider Red. The weapon I painted with the same steps I did on the Kronos weapon to differentiate the black colours a little bit. First tidied up with black, then highlighted with Dark Reaper, and finally with Thunderhawk Blue. And that's good for now on Jormungandr. Next is Ouraboris. For Ouraboris, I started with a black spray primer before blocking in all the skin with Ahriman blue. I washed this back with Drakenov Nightshade, mixed 50-50 with Lama Medium to take the harsh edge off, though with the new formula of shades you might not need to. I then highlighted back up with Ahriman blue, and a 50-50 mix of Ahriman blue and Baharoth blue. Temple Guard blue would also suit here, but I had both of these colours on my palette and mixing them together got the right kind of results. You then have the option with characters and big Tyranids to use Baharoth blue as a top highlight. The inner flesh I painted the same way as with the other pink flesh schemes. Based with Screamer Pink, washed with Caribird Crimson, and highlighted with Screamer Pink and Kislev Flesh. I've used the same pink scheme so far because on all of the concept art I could find, they all had pink inner flesh, so I'm just rolling with it. For the black carapace, I reblocked in with black before glazing on Skaven Blight Dinge towards the end of the plates. I then drew on the striations with Storm Vermin Fur and Administratum Grey. The claws, hooves and weapons all sport the same pale bony colour, so I based all those areas with Rakarth Flesh. They then got a wash back with Agrax of the Shade before being highlighted with Rakarth Flesh and Pallid Witch Flesh. That'll do for Ouraboris for now, so let's move on to the last Hive Fleet, Tiamet. For Tiamet's ghostly pale skin, I started with a white spray primer. Corax white in my case, I don't have skull white but it would be perfect. And washed the whole skin back with Colia green shade, cut 50-50 with Lamia medium to take the edge off. I then relayered and highlighted with Ulthuan grey and with pure white. The inner flesh caused plenty of anxiety this time as this scheme has a lot of stark contrast. I very carefully blocked in those areas with Incubi Darkness, washed them back with Null Oil, and then highlighted with Cabalite Green and Cyberite Green. I used a thin brush for the inner flesh areas over all the schemes, but for these paler schemes it bears mentioning that it's much easier with a smaller brush. For the purple weapons I blocked in with a couple layers of Nagaroth Knight, before washing back with Null Oil for a little depth in the recesses. I then highlighted with Xerius Purple and then with Genestealer Purple. The carapace uses the same colours as the inner flesh, so I started by blocking the carapace in with black, again being careful of overspill on that pale skin. I then glazed Incubi Darkness towards the end of the plates and drew the highlights on with Cabalite Green and Cyberite Green, with the option of using Ghost Blaster Green as a top highlight for characters and monsters. The claws and hooves were blocked in with black before being highlighted with Eshin Grey and Dawnstone, nice and quick. This is the only scheme with a differing eye colour to the rest, so real quick I painted the eyes in with Evil Sun Scarlet and then a dot of Wild Rider Red towards the front. With all the Gants up to the same point, I then went back and painted the remaining eyes and teeth of the other Hive fleets. For the yellow eyes I based the whole eyeball in Avalanche Sunset, and then relayed with Iriel Yellow. If it runs out of control and dries in, a drop of Druchii Violet followed by another try with Iriel Yellow should do the trick. For the teeth and any remaining claws left on the minis, I based them with Rakarth Flesh, and then washed them back with Agrax of the Shade. A simple quick highlight of Pallid Witch Flesh finished off those details, and then I based all the Gants with a simple grey base. You can feel free to base your minis however you like, I just went with grey to be neutral across all the schemes. And with that, that's how I painted all of these Hive Fleets. I know I've missed a few from the newer editions, but maybe I can come back and do those in another video. Hopefully this gives you a hand in painting the Hive Fleets I've covered, and maybe even helps you with breaking down the separate elements to make your own schemes. I did this one for example using the same steps, basing him off of the Grinaldo from Final Fantasy VIII. I didn't cover patterns in the video, but the ones I did on this are just line patterns, nothing too out there. And for anybody wondering where Leviathan is, don't worry, I'll get to it eventually. If you have any questions, or if I skipped over something too quickly, leave a comment below and I'll get back to you. Thanks again for watching, good luck with your Tyranids, and I'll see you again soon.